I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Imagine you're 16 years old. You're a young mother. You're tied to a bed at your grandmother's house while the man you once loved walks through your family home, executing them one by one. Your baby is lying beside you. You hear shots. You hear bodies fall. And then he cuts you loose, hands you your daughter and says, "We're leaving." That nightmare was not a movie. It happened in Alabama in 2002. The man's name is Westley Harris. Today, more than 23 years later, he sits on Alabama's death row. This is the story of a family he destroyed. I'm Jim Chapman, host of Bloody Angola, and this is 50 Shades of Evil, Alabama. Now, if you're a regular listener of Bloody Angola, you know that I love digging deep into the most dangerous of inmates that make up the 50 states. Today, I'm bringing you into Alabama to tell you the story of Westley Harris, the case that shocked the state of Alabama when it occurred in 2002. And you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you. So let's get right into it. And I'm going to start by giving you a little background on Westley Harris. Now, he was born in South Central Alabama. This is in April of 1980. And he was raised primarily by his mother and his grandmother. His family, they struggled economically. They moved around the South Central Alabama area frequently during his childhood years. Now, when he was in the 7th grade, it is reported that he suffered a head injury that would lead to consistent migraines and a seizure disorder. Now, by the mid to late 90s, he was in his teenage years, and those who knew him would describe him as mild-mannered, likable, polite, easygoing, which would directly contrast with what I am about to tell you as it relates to his crimes. At this time in his life, there were no reports of any criminal activity during his high school years, but he would struggle academically in school, and that would lead him to eventually dropping out of high school. So just a few years after dropping out in late 1998, at the age of 19, he meets a 14-year-old girl by the name of Janice Ball. Now, Janice was raised quite differently than Wesley. She had a very close family. They all, as a matter of fact, lived on a family farm in Crenshaw County, Alabama. So Crenshaw County is just outside of Montgomery, Alabama, and where the family lived, it was very rural. I'm talking in the middle of nowhere. The family farm was very isolated. Now, the relationship and the way that Westley entered this relationship, it could be described as quite the storm. What started out as a risky, youthful romance, remember, he was much older, that would quickly spiral into a turbulent, controlling relationship. Those early days of romance were very intense, and just 3 months after Janice and Westley met, she was already pregnant. 9 months later, the couple would welcome their daughter, Shay, into the world. However, Wesley, he was not what you would call a present father during this pregnancy. And Janice would almost never see him during those 9 months prior to her daughter's birth. Now, after the birth, Wesley appeared to want to be more involved, and the couple attempted to make a life together. They settled into a trailer in nearby Laverne, Alabama. But the cracks in this relationship would absolutely appear almost immediately as Wesley grew even more violent and even more controlling now that Janice was living with him. The smallest arguments would trigger what Janice would describe later as a rage in Wesley, and he would beat her violently during these instances. The violence would eventually cause her to leave that trailer and return to the safety of her family's farm, where she would live in the main house with her grandmother, Mila Ruth Ball. Now, despite the abuse, much like you see in many other cases of abusive relationships, the couple doesn't completely split up. They maintain contact. They're back and forth with each other. And this young lady, she had a baby with this guy. She was trying to make it work for better or worse. As a matter of fact, Janice's father, Willie, who was no fan of Wesley, to say the least, he, in I can only speak to say love for his daughter, even tried to make this thing work. And he tried to support the young couple by purchasing a trailer and actually placing it on the family farm. Now, I can only assume that his hope here was maybe that Wesley would feel less pressure to pay bills and not go into these violent outbursts. It seemed like a lot of these would be triggered by financial problems. And in addition to that, if they lived on the family farm, he could also keep an eye on his daughter and hopefully keep her safe. Now, despite all this help, the relationship between these two, unfortunately, would not improve. They would break up, they would get back together, break up again, get back together again, and they were just seemingly stuck in this constant back and forth cycle. Wesley's temper seemed to control everything, and Janice just never knew what was going to set him off. He was unemployed, and he was also dealing with a recent arrest for distribution of crack cocaine. This was in 2001, and he would often take his legal frustration out on Janice physically. So I'm going to take you to August of 2002. Janice at this point was 16 years old, and Westley Harris was 22 years old. Shay, their daughter at this point in time, was 17 months old. And the relationship just gets totally out of control. They get in an argument on August 23rd of 2002 over Wesley's refusal to pay Janice for some diapers that he had bought for Shay that he agreed to pay for. She asked him about it. He refuses to give her the money. And in the midst of this back and forth fighting, he hauls off and slaps her so hard it knocks her to the ground. She gets up and she's going to defend herself. She actually grabs a shotgun from the closet. Now, around this time, her brother Jerry enters the main house, and he sees that she has this shotgun pointed at Westley, and he attempts to calm everybody down before things get worse. You know, there's no good ending to this with someone having a shotgun pointing at someone they're pissed at, right? Eventually, everything does calm down and Westley storms out of that farm and leaves the property. But it wouldn't take long. The very next day, as a matter of fact, Wesley starts calling Janice at her work, and he's begging her not to call the police over that smackdown, if you will, that he gave her. He's acting as if he's sorry, trying to manipulate her, all those things, but she doesn't tell him what she's decided to do. The fact is, she hadn't made up her mind yet. Maybe she would call the police. Maybe she wouldn't call the police. She was still thinking all of that over. But that was not enough for Wesley. He wanted an answer, right? So the next evening, which is Sunday evening, Westley shows up at the farm and he is determined to speak to Janice. Her grandmother, Mila Ruth, confronts him and she tells him if he doesn't leave the farm, she's going to call police. Well, he still refuses to leave the farm. But rather than call the police, she rounds up Janice's father, who then rounds up two of her brothers, Jerry and John, as well as Janice's mother, Joanne, and they all show up at that trailer on the property armed, and they ain't playing. They are going to make sure Wesley leaves the property, even if he has to by gunpoint. And that brings us to the horrific events that would take place on August 26th of 2002. So Westley Harris, by this point, he's enraged. He's probably stayed up all night thinking on how he is going to get his hands on Janice. You got to remember, this is a guy that is used to controlling her. And that rage just builds and builds to the point that he can't take it anymore. The very next morning at approximately 8:30 a.m., he arrives at the Ball family farm, and this time he is armed with a shotgun.
Jim, did you see what happened in Texas today?
Wait, before you tell me that, let me tell you what happened in New York.
It cannot be as crazy as the case I told you about yesterday in Louisiana.
You know what? We should do a podcast about it.
And with that, we did. Crime Wire Weekly covers the crime news headlines that have dominated the week.
We cover trending crimes from all over the country and even sprinkle in a few globally.
Crime Wire Weekly is available now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Simply by searching Crime Wire Weekly or clicking the link in the description of this podcast. He breaks into the main house. Janice is awoken with the sight of Westley, rage in his eyes, standing over her, shaking the bed violently, trying to wake her up. He has the shotgun pressed into her grandmother, Mila Ruth's stomach, and he forces both women into the kitchen of that main house. He then makes 62-year-old grandmother, Mila, lie on the floor, and he tapes her wrist behind her back with duct tape. Now, Mila Ruth, hands behind her back, taped with this duct tape, she attempts to get to her knees, and she also is scared to death, and she starts to pray. And it's at this point that Wesley Harris takes the shotgun and he shoots grandmother Mila Ruth right in the face, killing her. He then turns his attention to Janice, tying her hands behind her back with the duct tape, and then brings her into the bedroom, and he takes a telephone cord and an extension cord, and he ties Janice to the bed. He then turns his attention toward baby Shay, picks her up, places her in the bed, and tells Janice, quote, "Don't do anything stupid." Then, as Janice is laying there, she hears footsteps of him walking away and walking out of the house. Now, what she didn't know is that he was heading to her brother, 17-year-old Tony's room. He goes into Tony's bedroom, where Wesley finds him sleeping. He puts a gun to his head, shoots him, and kills him. Point blank range. He goes back into the main house, and then for roughly 7 hours, Wesley remains in that house. Periodically, he would check on Janice. He would watch TV, acting the exact opposite of someone you would expect had just murdered two people. Now, at 3:30 p.m., Janice's older brother, 19-year-old Jerry Ball, he arrives at the home after picking up Janice's younger brother, 14-year-old John Ball, from school. So he drops John Ball in the front of that main house and he drives off. John enters the home just as Jerry drops him off and leaves. And before he can even walk in the home, Wesley shoots him. Then he pulls him into the house, still alive, shoots him again, kills him in the kitchen. About 30 minutes later, at 4:00 p.m., Janice's father, 40-year-old Willie, arrives on the property. Now, he goes first out to the hog pen to feed the hogs. Wesley exits the main house, meets him at the hog pen, shoots him in the face, killing him. And if you're keeping track, that's Wesley's fourth victim of the day. Then about an hour later, at 5:00 p.m., Janice's mother, 35-year-old Joanne, she arrives at the home. She enters the home, and as soon as she walks in, you guessed it, Wesley shoots her in the face. Joanne then falls to the floor, and just to make sure she's dead, Wesley fires yet another shot into the back of her neck, killing her. Now that's victim number 5. But Wesley, he's not done yet. About 30 minutes later, Jerry Ball returns to that farm. He runs up the porch steps where Wesley shoots him once in the head and once in the chest, killing him. So in a 9 to 10 hour time span, Westley Harris had killed Janice's mother, Janice's father, her 3 brothers, and her grandmother. 6 people. Throughout this entire ordeal, Janice was forced to lay there, tied to the bed, while hearing each family member get murdered, hearing those gunshots going off. And when it was done, Wesley slowly unties Janice and tells her to make Baby Shay a bottle. He then loads up some stolen items that he's going to steal from all these people into the car, and he flees the farm with Janice, Shay, and even the family dog. So over the next several days, they would stay at friend's house with Janice obviously living in total fear that he's going to kill her and the baby if she says anything about any of this. But it was really no secret. The victims were discovered the very next day by Crenshaw County Sheriff's deputies. This was on the evening of Tuesday, August 27th of 2002, the day after the killings. The deputies get dispatched to the farm after a family member by the name of Coleman Ball, who was the son of Mila Ruth Ball. He goes to the property and he finds his mother's house locked. He had been alerted by his aunt, who was concerned because the door was locked, and that was apparently very unusual for the family. So police make entry, and they make, obviously, this horrific discovery. So you have a manhunt going on at this point for the murders of 6 people. 6 people. All of the state of Alabama is on watch for these 2. And police had a really good idea that Wesley was the one responsible. So 3 days later, after they implore the help of Wesley's aunt, who takes to the airwaves to beg her nephew to give up, it actually works. And on August 29th of 2002, Wesley is taken into custody for these killings, as is Janice. And of course, it didn't take long. Police quickly determined Janice had nothing to do with the killings and was a victim of this guy. So the very next day, he is charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder, each count carrying a possible death penalty. And it took a while, but by the fall of 2004, the case was finally ready for trial. Jury selection begins. This is on October 25th of 2004, and the trial commences on November 3rd of 2004. The prosecution, of course, painted a picture of a calculated, vengeful attack driven by Harris's resentment toward the Ball family for trying to protect Janice from his abuse. Janice, of course, testified in length, and she recounted how Harris had held her captive and forced her to witness the killings and then abducted her and their daughter as they fled. Now, the defense, they aggressively countered this, and that's their job, right? They argued that Janice was an unreliable witness who may have had her own motives related to the family issues and that she had possibly solicited or participated in the plan. Obviously, that is totally bogus and ridiculous. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks, but on November 15th of 2004, suddenly that trial comes to an abrupt end and a mistrial is declared. That's right, a mistrial. So what happened? Well, evidence emerged of jury tampering. Apparently, a woman connected to Harris's circle, which was later identified as a close friend of his, had attempted to influence at least one juror, and a juror was found to have committed perjury regarding this. Now, both the woman and the juror later pleaded guilty to offenses related to that. But the judge had no choice in this matter but to declare a mistrial and order a retrial. Now, that second trial starts in the spring of 2005, and a full jury, they were already seated just a couple of days later. This time, the proceedings moved much more efficiently. The guilt phase unfolded over roughly 2 weeks in early June of that year, and the prosecution again relied heavily on Janice's testimony. They also had some forensic evidence linking Harris to those shootings, and of course, they covered the timeline of these crimes. And the defense, again, tried to attack Janice's credibility, and they presented some evidence of Harris's difficult childhood. They tried to say he was a low-functioning intellectual, and they also focused on the fact that he didn't have a very significant prior criminal history. He had one, remember, he got arrested for selling crack cocaine, but they really focused on he wasn't one of these guys that had been in and out of jail since he was 14. Like that freaking matters when you shoot and kill 6 people. So on June 14th of 2005, after deliberating, the jury returned verdicts of guilty on all 6 counts of capital murder. And Harris, he showed very little visible emotion as these convictions were read. Of course, the penalty phase followed that. As a matter of fact, it was the very next day. And this was the critical stage where the jury would recommend life without parole or death. Now, the defense presented an extensive case. They called 10 witnesses, including family members, a former baseball coach, a youth minister, and even jail officials. And long story short, by the time this thing was all over, Harris received the death sentence, which at that time he was condemned to death by lethal injection. Now, if you've learned anything since I've been covering not only these cases, but everything I've covered on Bloody Angola, it's not that simple. Of course, he had appeals, etc., throughout the years, but in each of those appeals, eventually his death sentence was upheld. So when he's sentenced to death, he arrives at what's known as the William C. Holman Correctional Facility. This is in Atmore, Alabama. And for more than 20 years now, Harris is identified in prison records as prisoner 0000Z715. Obviously, he lives inside the walls of Holman, which is one of Alabama's most notorious prisons. The facility sits isolated among cotton fields. Its perimeter fences and watchtowers are a constant reminder that this is the end of the line for many, and Harris was no exception. Death row at Holman is a world apart, even from the rest of the prison's violent general population. See, here the condemned are kept in restrictive housing, and they are largely cut off from human contact. A typical day for Harris would start in a very small cell, roughly the size of an average bathroom, maybe 8 by 12 feet. Inside of that cell, there is a steel bunk, a combined sink and toilet, a narrow table, shelf bolted to a wall. The heavy door closes with that familiar clang every night for him. And for 22 to 24 hours a day, that cell is his entire world. His meals are slid through a narrow slot in that cell door. Showers come just a few times a week, and typically, almost always, for death row inmates, that's under escort. He has very limited natural light, and the music of the day is typically the sounds of guards walking up and down that tier, distant voices, maybe the occasional scrape of a food tray. Now, a few times each week, if the schedule holds, Harris, he might be allowed out for recreation, often alone in a small fenced cage where he can pace, stretch, or just simply stand there. Communication with other inmates only occurs through fishing, which you're not supposed to do, but these are improvised lines made from torn sheets of clothing that slide notes or small items from cell to cell. He can read, he can write letters, he can work on legal papers, he can listen to a radio or watch limited television, and his visits always take place behind glass. Phone calls are brief, monitored, and very infrequent. And that is his life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I cannot say that I feel sorry for Westley Devone Harris. He's now in his mid-40s. He has spent more than half his life behind these walls, all because of a knee-jerk reaction and the absolute insanity to control another human being that led him to kill Janice's 6 family members. Absolutely horrific. He is 100% one of the most dangerous inmates in Alabama, and that was his story. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another edition of 50 Shades of Evil. Not sure where I'm going to go next, so you'll have to tune in and see if it's your state that I pick next. You can check us out on Patreon for ad-free releases of all these episodes, plus much more. I have over 200 ad-free episodes up on the Patreon. That is patreon.com/Bloody Angola Podcast. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang, Rango